Commander Community, the show where we discuss everything, the people, the places, and the things beyond the tabletop of Magic the Gathering's most popular format, brought to you by Star City Games.
I'm anthonyaalongi.
And I'm Sheldon Menery. In each episode, we'll address one or more hot-button issues in the Commander community. We'll talk about Commander's current events, or maybe like today, some of its past, and the intersection of our hobby with life in general.
And I am still 100% likely to ask Sheldon, calling through history, Sheldon, what the hell is wrong with you?
And we'll see if there's more of an answer today than there was yesterday.
I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
All right. So, Sheldon, a few weeks back, you started another show with other co-hosts. Don't deny it. I've seen the video evidence.
I do not deny it, but I was thinking about you the whole time.
Yeah, whatever. So on one of those shows, you did a history of Commander. You've got a history of Commander, a technical history, if you will. I
swear, it meant nothing to me.
Well, okay. Well, so all right. Today we're going to take another look at this time. You're going to take a look at history with me, right. But we're going to do it with a twist.
It's our special time, Anthony. It's our time to be together and talk about the history of Commander.
It is. And we're going to take a look at what was going on in the community at the time. Mm-hmm. So the Commander community once it was developed, but of course before that, the broader Magic community, when there was no Commander community in the early phases. So we're going to acknowledge some of the lesser known voices that shaped the format and the game, and remind our audience of the great people who've contributed to our community throughout time.
Yeah, we'll also talk about some of what was going on in the world culturally, because remembering some of that is just flat out fun. And I'm sure somebody will hear one or two of the cultural things we talk about and go, "Oh yeah, that."
Yeah, exactly. Just a little light touch, a little soupçon of paprika on the fish. All right, fun will indeed be had. So we've got a lot to go through, Sheldon. There's a lot of history that we got to go through. 4 eras of history that we have to go through in less than an hour. Are you strapped in?
You cannot tell under my blazer, but yes, I am.
All right, I believe you. Sweet. All right, the first era is the era what I call it's just my name for it. It's just what I've. There's no official imprimatur on this, but I would like it if everybody were to start calling this the era of forming. All right. So this would be the years covering from when Commander was just a twinkle in your eye to about the time there would have been a rules committee forming because people were already pulling at the baby in different directions. Right. So this would be about 2003 to 2006. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I left Alaska in early 2003, brought it with me to Virginia when I was stationed there. And that's when we really got the ball rolling. And I think the cultural underpinnings of it are really, really important.
Yeah,
because I was playing with a group. I was already a relatively well-known Magic personality, and some folks had contacted me before I moved to Virginia and was like, "Hey, we heard you're coming. Come play Magic with us. We're a local group of fun people who, don't go to tournaments much. We just play a lot of kitchen table Magic." So I joined up with them, and we played on, we drafted, and we played Chaos, and, did a lot of things, and played some games and stuff. And at one point, I was like, so there's this format, and I described it, and we were like, give it a try. They were like, sure. So we gave it a try. And to cut to the chase, shortly after we did that, it was all anybody wanted to play.
Yeah.
And that was what got me thinking more about it. And the cultural part there that's really important to me is that the fact that these were kitchen table Magic players. These were folks that were invested to some degree or another, but were really just very casual and didn't want the tournament experience. They didn't even go to FNM, right? They were we just want to play the game. The game is fun and we want to have an excuse to hang out with our friends. Right. And it occurred to me at that point, well, we could probably make this into that.
Yeah.
That, that experience, that a tournament, that a competitive, not anti-competitive, that a competitive experience. So the socialization underneath is what became important in the formation period, in the era of forming, because it was about a thing. Most formats are defined by hard technical lines, and really worked into the DNA of EDH, which became Commander, was the social aspect.
And it probably felt a lot like almost creating a new game, just because, like, when people play a new game and there's sort of that feeling of, yeah, this is pretty cool. This is almost, whether it's a board game that's new to them or a card game that's new to them. I mean, there's sort of that extra feel to it where people are like, I'm really enjoying this. Are you enjoying this? Yeah, I enjoy it. Like everybody's like, how about if we do this again next, Saturday or Thursday or whatever? And people are like, yeah, let's do the thing again. And everybody feels like, all right, this is kind of where the group's going.
Yeah, hey, that dragon thing, let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah, because it was called, of course, back in the day, called Elder Dragon Highlander. That's what EDH stands for those that are still fairly new to the format.
Right.
All right. So excellent. So now back then we didn't have a what people would recognize as a Commander community outside of a small living room in Virginia, perhaps. But we had multiplayer enthusiasts, and you were playing this as a multiplayer format. It sounds like, right? So and we had lots of different casual formats out there that people were trying. We had. Emperor was kind of still a big thing, although people generally don't play that much anymore. 5-color, which is that 250 cards kind of deal, and
monstrosity.
And even like on the tournament scene, we had things called Rochester Draft. If folks don't know this, when you're essentially drafting the packs face up, and your pick order, everybody's seeing your picks, and you wheel things all whatever in a different way. And the Rochester Draft was losing popularity because it took so long, but it was a big deal. It was how a lot of Pro Tour qualifiers happened.
Well, Rochester Draft is an intensely skill testing.
Yeah,
and it's great. Rochester was great for professional Magic players.
Yeah,
everybody else
who had lots of free time.
Well,
the subset that have free time. I don't mean all of them have free time. I mean the subset of really good Magic players who also have loads of time.
Right. And it's interesting. We took some lessons early on from 5-color. Yeah. And one of the things that I recognized about 5-color, which crumbled under its own weight, was that the 5-color rules committee, whatever they called themselves at the time, they tried to do too much.
Right.
They tried to firmly grip the handle here, and I know you play golf.
Yep.
I play golf. I play baseball. You can't put a stranglehold on the shaft of the club, or the handle of the bat. Right. If you grip too tightly,
right,
you're not going to hit a good shot. You have to have a relaxed grip. And I saw from the early days, it was a 250 card format, which is bad enough. But then there were 100 band cards or 125 band cards, and it's like you needed an adding machine, a spreadsheet, and an abacus to figure out how to build a deck.
Right.
And it was just too complicated.
Right. I did like, and it is, we're not trashing the format at all. Like they're, I believe Curtis Hahn was his name. One of the originators of it. And like what I liked about what he and his colleagues created was at least that idea of going the other way from tournament play in at least the basic rules, right? But then at the moment where they start to turn back around and say, but we want to have a lot of, it's like the tighter your grip, the more star systems slip through your fingers, to quote Princess Leia. And when they tried to create that tighter grip, I just think you're right. Things kind of slipped away. This all happened during a time, Sheldon, when the music scene, to shift a little bit into the culture of the time, at least the culture in the U.S. When we say the culture of the world, I don't mean to suggest the U.S. culture is the world culture. But in the U.S., the music scene was pretty hot. And I'm curious, Sheldon, if you can guess the best song by my definition, not not award winners or that, but what was the best song of 2003?
Why?
When you were coming from Alaska to Virginia,
right,
there
to Virginia.
what were you listening to?
When I was returning to America, as it were, it was, Alaska was a nice transition. I'd been in Europe for 6 years.
It's a good halfway house.
Alaska was a good easing back into America thing. Well, I'll tell you, my time from 1994 to 2000 in Europe there's a big blank zone in American music for me.
Right.
Because, well, I was paying attention to
other
what
stuff.
was, MTV Europe. Yeah. MTV Europe had videos on it.
Sure.
And they were predominantly European artists. So there was some American crossover, and I know some things like Ace of Base apparently was popular over here too.
That is not the answer, in case you're wondering.
But
no.
but that's
we're not going to end up at Ace of Base.
No. So there was a big gap in my sort of American music of that era. So by the time I was coming back to America in 2000, and then sort of peeling into the post-Alaska years, I was still catching up on some things that I had missed back in the 90s. And 2003 happened to be the year, since you asked about that year, was the year that I discovered what has become one of my favorite bands, that's Dream Theater. So the best song for me from 2003, recognizing that Evanescence had their Monster album out at that time.
Bring Me to Life was a big song.
Bring Me to Life was a big hit. Yeah. Not even the best song on that album, but
no.
The best song for me in 2003 was Dream Theater's 1992 song "Pull Me Under" from their album Images and Words.
Okay. As thoughtful and articulate as your answer was, Sheldon, it is fundamentally wrong. The correct answer is Crazy in Love by a little someone named Beyonce, who did not yet rule the world as she now rightfully does. Judges would have also accepted Where's the Love by Black Eyed Peas, or If You Must, Hey Ya by Outkast. All right, next question. Who was the most important contributor to the Magic community at the time?
You mean besides me?
Besides me.
Yeah.
No, there is no besides me.
Right. I would say, and clearly to our viewers, it wasn't me.
You were pretty important.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
But you have other names in mind. Besides you and me.
Okay, names that maybe, again, names that haven't had as much light shined on them. I'm gonna say my pick is Duncan McGregor. Okay. And Duncan was a level 3 judge from Canada, who is very, very, very smart dude. And he was the third co-founder of the Commander Rules Committee with Gavin and I.
Little known fact.
So it was, we were over tilted in the Canadians at that point. I mean, 1 out of 4 is probably still a little over tilting. And the fact that we have a Canadian and a Brit, so we're half subjects of the crown. Oh my goodness. Jesus. Wow. Anyway, so Duncan was a relatively well-known level 3 judge, did a fair number of pro tours and GPs and things. And later in the period that we're talking about, late 2005, early 2006, Duncan was the third person that Gavin and I talked to about foundation of the Commander Rules Committee. Right. And I'd say that was a pretty important point in the history of the format. Duncan was also an inveterate evangelist of the format. It caught fire first amongst the Pro Tour judges when I brought it to them. I saw the passion with which my casual group had embraced it. So I'm like, what other friends do I have that love to play Magic that might be interested. And as the format has done a number of times in its history, surprised me with the passion of the response, the vehemence of the response. And it was really introducing it to the judges. Again, an important cultural touchstone.
Right.
Was like putting tinder putting fire to dry tinder.
Right. They're the perfect delivery system. I mean, the network of judges worldwide. Right. I mean, like you have a small but still significant group of people who include well-known personalities, but also loads and loads of folks who are just working their way, level 1s, level 2s, etc. And, so they reach into every store and tournament. They travel. They go, like, if this were a pandemic, they would be like, they would be the ones responsible for bringing it from China to Rome to wherever. Like this is the group that was just truly. I like when I first heard about it. It was in that context of all the judges are playing this. And that to me means something. That means, you aside, that. If I know that a lot of judges who tend to be very good Magic players, but just because of the role they play, they're not eligible to play in tournaments generally. But they're also they're not as interested in tournaments as they are as interested in the game. And when they get together, you're probably having a very honest game of Magic, so you're not worried about some of what you might be worried about in tournament Magic. It's just a great confluence of sort of authority and passion and worldliness and easy traveling.
Well, one of the things we have to think about is at the time, the Magic world was a very top down. We live today in Magic, and for the last decade, we've lived in this sort of bottom up world of Magic. But especially at this time, and we're talking 2004, 2005, everything emanated from the Pro Tour. Right. Everything, sort of the way we looked at Magic trickled down from the top. So the 400 Pro Tour players became the sort of breeding ground for everything that happened in other Magic formats. So it was natural that things would also trickle down from the judge community. That the way that we were doing things at the top matriculated into all the other levels. Yep. So again, I really think that in this era of formation, we were really in a perfect storm with a couple of good bounces as well. Yeah,
right. So by 2006, you had this game rolling. You had ban lists, you had deck building structure, and you established this rules committee, which is a boring part of history. We're going to skip it because once we had a rules, who cares, right?
Right.
Presumably, is there anything you'd like to say about the rules committee that maybe hasn't been said as often elsewhere?
Well, again, we didn't start as sophisticated as we ended up, right? We were just like. There were three of us, and we were like, what are we going to do with this thing? It really was well, we probably should, right? Not we must, but we realized it had gained some popularity, and remember at the time, one of the baked-in rules was in your local environment, if you're playing someone as your commander, nobody else can play it. So I
don't think I ever played under those rules. Wow.
Yeah. And if somebody had, you couldn't even have it in your deck. So you had to do a pregame check to see if, you had somebody else's general, which is what we called it at the time, in your deck. Right. So, we needed like a website or a spreadsheet, at least for the Pro Tour judges, where people would go reserve their general for the Pro Tour. Because, nobody had 12 decks at this point. Right. Everybody had a deck, maybe a backup. Right. So you had to reserve your general. Nice. So it really was this through the community. And, there are a lot of people who early on just got into it. And Eric Levine was one of them, just started spreading the word. Paul... Oh my goodness, DC area judge, and now I'm blanking on his last name. who I haven't seen in a long, long time. But yeah, there were just there's so many people that wanted this to that spread the love of this. And that's how it is when you find a thing, whether it's a movie, a book, TV show, or whatever that you love, you want to share it with your friends. And that's what happened here.
Yeah, good. So then, I mean, from that point forward, once you've got these structures, and like you said, like very top down, and then actually we might revisit that idea later on in the episode, because I think that I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of top down in the Magic, not just in Commander, but elsewhere. The way people looked to the center is different than the way people look at the center now.
Yes.
In the whole Magic community, I believe. But in any case, so at this point now you've done the era of forming, and now you're in the era of storming. By the way, practice facilitators out there are going to guess what the next couple are. So the era of storming, okay, and storming Commander did right all over the casual tables, the slim edges of tournament events, okay, worldwide. Right. So I would characterize this phrase. But it still wasn't like, there was still nothing official about it, really, in terms of like Wizards putting a stamp on it from about 2006 to 2012, we'll call this, right?
Yeah. So this is basically the period where it really started to get momentum. Once the formation of the Rules Committee wasn't a momentum point. It was just us hopping on the train as it rolled by, really. So in this period, I'd say from 2006, after post Rules Committee until the first Commander product, 2011, is the real era of storming, and it's during this point that I started writing exclusively about the format. When I came back, so I took a break from Star Seed in about 2005. It was it's like it's time to let somebody else do the Ask the Judge, and I passed that along to a very capable judge named Chris Richter. And I kept doing Feature Fridays for a while. Then I'm like, let's let Chris do. Let's see, give other people opportunities for success. Right. So then, sometime in around 2007. Pete was like, why don't you come back and write for Star City again?
Right.
And I was like, Pete, I don't know. He's like, here's an incentive. I'm like, okay.
Good old Pete. Hey, Pete. How's it going,
Good old Pete. So it's at this point, I started writing exclusively about Commander every week. And again, it's really the first dedicated content about the format. I'm sure there were people writing all over forums and stuff about it. And it's in this point we also had the official website on GeoCities or something, which we kept until last year.
Yeah.
But we started.
Your commitment to tradition is laudable,
right? And it was moving. There was movement, and we started seeing a development of passion outside of the judge community.
Right.
And again, that those trickle down economics does not work. I am not an economist, but I can tell you. Trickle-down Magic formats might, and we've seen evidence. So those judges, who are maybe the second or third order down from those Pro Tour judges, those Pro Tour judges are high-level judges, level 3s and whatnot. And then they're going back into their regions. Some of them are regional coordinators. They're going back and they're taking it to the GPs in their regions and their local store organizers, and then. If a couple of judges are playing, like sometimes we'd be playing at after hours at a PT, player would walk by. Hey, what are you doing?
What you doing? What you up
to?
Yeah. What is this?
And
why do you have these 4 cards in the middle of the table? What is that?
Yeah. Well, why are you playing Sol Ring?
Why aren't you playing something?
What kind of stupid format has Soaring in?
All right, so this is all good stuff. So while you're out there, you're enjoying the fruits of your labor, you're plump with satisfaction
Right.
at what you've created, yet free of the burdens of a constant Twitter community breaking you down with requests for hybrid mana illegality. So while you were doing all this, you did watch the occasional movie, I presume?
I did. I'm going to remind you that you owe the jar $1 for bringing up hybrid mana.
Ding! Remember, I use dollar coins. So we'll pick 2009. What was the best movie? I don't mean Academy Award winner, although you can certainly choose that. But what's your best movie of 2009?
All right, '09 Slumdog Millionaire was the best picture, right?
That was the Academy winner.
Academy Award. Yeah. 2009 also Quentin Tarantino's finest work, Inglourious Bastards, which I will pick as the best film of that year.
That's not far off, but you are wrong again, Sheldon. The correct answer is District 9, which is an instant science fiction classic, a statement, both historical and visionary, as to how we treat the other, all right, and the privilege that we don't see unless forced to, all right? And also, I would have accepted Coraline, which was an insane animation feat at the time, and featured Terry Hatcher in an outstanding role that didn't exploit her for her looks, which was kind of nice to see as well. So
I feel like we're going to continue to disagree here.
yes, that's what you get when you let me write the scripts. So both of these movies deal with topics that parts of the Magic community, and in fact, Inglourious Bastards, in its Quentin Tarantino way.
Right.
Well, I love the movie. Don't get me wrong, but but we were starting to, in the Magic community, we were starting to pay attention to, at least in the parts of the community that I was connecting with. We're starting to pay attention to some issues of diversity, issues of different voices, issues of gender, and whether or not it's about how she looks, about whether or not there's another out there, and how you treat the other, how you treat language around them, how you talk about people when you're just with your white friends, and how you talk about people when you're not. And I can recall some of the first and most seminal. I'm not going to remember all the authors now, but I can remember there being some new female voices in the community. I can remember there being, unfortunately, only one or two Black or BIPOC at all, and voices being out there starting to say something like, "Do you all know how hard this is?" And I think at the time, partly because Twitter community wasn't really there to give a more instantaneous response, and partly because we were just even worse at it than we are now. The answer was pretty much a shrug. I think that, but among many people, too many people, even those of us that didn't just shrug, I think we were also lost. I think we were also just not capable of doing the more stuff that we're doing now. So it was to think back on that era and to say somehow we've made progress still sounds a little icky, but at the same time,
I agree. I think we didn't do a great job.
Right. But I'd like to think that the tools that we have, Twitter and online communities, are helping us do maybe a better job, but they're also spreading a little bit more.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway,
I mean, at this point, there were still very few voices pushing things as far as Commander. As the EDH commander, it was still mostly a very tight group. There were very few people outside the circle. Right. During this period is when we added Scott and Toby to the RC. Duncan went on to do other things. We added another Canadian. What the hell is with the Canadians? Alex Kenny for a while.
What's that about?
Yeah.
Sorry, I know. All Canadian. I know every time somebody says Canada and then somebody says a boot. Sorry.
Scott and Toby came on, and it was about this time that, of course, it started to infect Wizards of the Coast.
Yeah.
And Scott was the operative there, even before he was on the RC.
Right.
He was the Pro Tour manager, and we by 2006 or 2007 we were already very very close friends, having been working together at Pro Tours and GPs for a long time.
Right.
Because, you know, in Magic years, 7 is a lot of years. They're like dog years.
Quick digression. Isn't it interesting that the manager of the Pro Tour was seminal to the spread of the casual format of Magic?
Yeah.
What is it? Like, I just think that's just neat. Just deserves a little bit. I mean, Scott, you know, I make fun of Scott a lot and I poke at him, and I'm sure he knows, you know, because we're friends and everything. But I just want to say, Scott, just thank you. I mean, like that was just huge that you had somebody of that weight and who had, like the judges, was at every event. Right. And who had his own deck or decks, and you know, would play, and that would just be something that people would see. And then what's the Pro Tour manager doing? Playing, you know, he's playing this really cool casual format. It creates the sense that among the competitive players too, that it's okay to do that, to sit back when it's not the tournament play and do something different. It matters. Yeah.
So Scott was really the operative in carrying the disease to Wizards of the Coast.
Right.
Because after the first, and literally the first time, he got very, very excited and went back. And the early adopters at Wizards were Aaron Forsyth and Matt Tabak. Nice. So again, we have real heavyweights.
Yeah.
That are getting it. Matter of fact, from Matt Tabak's Fertile Brain, a couple years later, is where we got the concept of color identity.
So what did you guys do with color identity before then? Like what
it was just color. It was just the casting cost of the commander.
Just the casting cost. Okay.
Yeah. So Bosch and Memnarch made themselves illegal. Because you couldn't have mana symbols on your cards that weren't in your commander's mana cost.
So that was the big change from that.
That was a huge change and it was really about sort of letting Memnarch and Bosch and Autumn Willow be commanders.
And Autumn Willow, I like that.
And Autumn Willow,
it's so important.
There still wasn't at this point a great deal of content. I'm pretty sure it was me and Benny Smith were the only ones writing in the early days.
Right. Sorry to abandon you, my friend. I stopped writing articles in 2006, and during this time, I would have been serving laid off workers during the Great Recession. So my apologies, but I would have gladly walked alongside you both during that time.
How dare you do work for the common good, sir? Yeah. How dare you?
Yes, that's true. It's a regret.
Yeah, I think MTG Salvation was one of the early sites, but it was pretty much a cesspool until much, much later. Late in this period, we added Devin Rule to the rules committee from, and Devin was the sort of, we want somebody from the wilderness, and you know, we weren't looking for another member of the rules committee.
Right.
But Devin was on a number of websites. Salvation was one of them, and the official Commander website had forums that were pretty lively for a while. And Devin was constantly a voice of reason and quality explanation, and just like a good magic mind. Right. So to a certain point, he had really distinguished themselves from these numerous Mos Eisley's on the internet, and we added him late, and that was I'd say on the cusp of moving into the next period. It was 2012 that we added him.
Right.
So back to the original point, we did not do our job in finding and cultivating diverse voices.
Right.
I mean, we can count Devin as kind of diverse because he wasn't an insider.
Perspective diversity, yeah, sure.
Perspective diversity, but certainly another straight white dude.
Right. Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, and you know
the market was already cornered.
Right, yeah, the market was cornered. Yeah, and so we, as we approach the end of the first half of this era, we're about to do our interlude, but as we approach this point, you know, just still, as you know, we have seen to recognize, you know, where we were as a community, and not your individual fault, not pointing fingers, just saying, where we were as a community was still very much what the history of magic, more and maybe gaming, more popular, and a lot of other aspects of American culture has been, which is overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, overwhelmingly hetero and cis, and so just just to think about that and reflect on it and see where we are. I think as there'll be more retrospectives in the future, we hopefully will continue to see progress on that. The formation of the CAG we'll talk about soon and things like that. Before we get to that, though, I believe we are at a point of interlude, Sheldon.
Interlude. Yes, this is where we would normally talk about our community contributor, but since we've woven the community contributors in, we'll do something different for the interlude.
Right.
Anthony, it's the year 2011.
In your head, yes.
I feel like you should be up close next to the microphone whispering this, so we get all that nice fuzzy resonance.
The year 2011.
Yeah, Wizards Coast has released the Commander set in 2011, and we know that the Commander's Arsenal followed up in 2012. The big pre-cons are still 2 years off. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give them about the pre-cons? 10 words or less.
Fewer.
Okay, that's one word, and I'll penalize you a word for pedantry. So you have 8 words left.
Let's see. Moderate, eminence, nerf, partner, slightly, and help red, white earlier.
That's 9. So if you
Boros.
You can concatenate your red white into Boros and hit your limit.
Right.
And I'll also point out you set me up for failure there since you wrote this script.
I did. I wrote it. I wrote it all myself.
So, sometimes stuff gets lost in translation between design and development. The designers start with ideas that develop into different things and or develop in directions that we don't quite expect. Yeah. So while I agree with your point in general, Eminence, Eminence was one of those, like, be careful. There's been a number of times. Now, back in this era, we didn't quite have the same amount of input into the developing Commander product as we do today. But a lot of our early advice on things, it's like, what do you think about this, was be careful.
Yeah. And heavens, we weren't setting them up like, the whole premise of this exercise is that we're looking back in hindsight. And Wizards does that all the time, and they look back, and they would say, I think most of them would say, come up with the same 8 words. I mean, or 9 words, whatever I call it. Like, they would probably feel the same way, and it's not their fault. I mean, they've made great product. I still have a Markov deck. I'm waiting to play Olivia, with it one of these days. And then let her just rip on me. It's not super broken. It's just a Markov deck that I just, and there's other Eminence deck I have, and I've got partner decks all over the place. I actually have a Timnios and Thrasos deck that I created without realizing what was happening out in the community. And I'm like, why are people freaking out about these 2 commanders? And I had a lot. It's high synergy. A lot of stuff goes on in the deck. Sure. But I wasn't taking it to the same level that a lot of other people take it. So to me, partner wasn't as big a deal. I don't think it was as big a mistake as people are making it out to be. I think nerfing it slightly. I don't think you have to go as far as just only partner with X anymore. Like I wish they could be more, maybe partner with red or partner with like slightly broader categories. They're still somewhat restrictive. I think would be good. I'd feel bad if the only partners were ever, you could only partner with this one other card, because the whole point of partner was that you can mix anything you want to.
It was providing a level of flexibility.
Right. And that's when I actually started to put together a commander draft for my group. I mean, I have a commander cube that was like, because you can take these things, you can mix them and match them however you like and create any color combination you want. That's the whole point. Anyway, make a good episode, I think, maybe someday, for us to rank the commander pre-con years. And I'm sure we're not the first to think of it, but we'd be probably the first ones to get it right.
Yes.
So the era of forming, the era of storming, the third era, the era of what I would call norming, came to Commander in 2013. And this is when Wizards started to produce the set of pre-constructed 100-card decks that anyone could, on the spot, play in a game. And I know they had previous stuff. They'd had Arsenal. They'd had some of the other, things that they'd done. But 2013 set, I think, really took off for them. People could have fun right out of the box, right away. There's no building muss or fuss if you didn't have the time or if you didn't understand the deck construction rules. Like, think about that barrier to entry into a lot of the games. I don't get how this works. 100 cards. What if I put together the wrong 100 cards? Here's a deck, just put it, just play it. And you could play it and you could have fun. So how would you describe this era, Sheldon? And I'm thinking like the next 4 or 5 years to about maybe 2018 or so. What was happening in the community that was important, other than the fact that I was joining it at last? I mean, that's pretty big deal.
Very, very important.
Pretty big deal.
Well, this was the era when Commander basically started becoming mainstream.
Yeah.
But probably by 2013, it was already the most popular multiplayer format. It was probably the most popular casual format. It was the most popular non-tournament format. But it was a time when it started infusing itself into the cultural lexicon of Magic in the bigger picture. In 2013, we had the first of the giant Grand Prix. In June of that year was the 5,000 player monstrosity in Las Vegas.
Right.
It would be a while before we got to Command Fest, obviously, but it showed us some of the possibilities.
Right.
I think I'm going to point to the first actual Command Zone being at SCG's Grand Prix Atlanta in 2015.
Okay.
They brought in me, Benny, Mark Globus from WotC, and there were a few other, like Commander Versus team was all there. So they brought in a bunch of Commander noteworthies to sling spells in this cordoned off area. I think it was even a ticketed event. It was an extra ticket. I did a big panel. The Commander Versus team did a big panel. So this was. We were part of the big picture tent, the big tent show that was coming to your to your Magic area along with the Grand Prix. It was the whole Grand Prix is a circus, and suddenly we were one of the the main three ring acts.
Right. So many jokes come to mind here with the circus analogy. I'm just gonna. You know what? You write your own. Viewers at home, just write your own joke. Give it a good chuckle. We're going to move on. Right. So meanwhile in culture, we're going to keep shifting media here. We've done movies. We've done songs. There are a lot of great books out there. And I'm not going to do a pop quiz on this one because, books are pretty deeply personal to me. And so instead, I'm going to share something that I'm reading now. And it was written in 2013. So James McBride, The Good Lord Bird. It's a book set in the era of slavery in the United States, just before the Civil War. It centers on a young black boy who starts off in slavery and finds himself facing extraordinary circumstances. Some of it's traumatic, some of it's endearing. It's all thought-provoking stuff. And it came out, let's bear in mind, while this book, which, award-winning book, I think they're going to turn it into a TV series on Showtime. I mean, it was kind of a big deal, made a huge splash, and it was happening while Barack Hussein Obama was starting his second term. A time of pretty substantial optimism for a lot of people in our country. So it was a time of great optimism as well for Commander. I mean, the products were sweet.
Yep. You
could almost always find a game at the local store.
Yep.
Even big tournament events, like you said, they were dedicating a table or two. Even if you weren't at the Atlanta event, you could go to a Grand Prix, and while they didn't reserve tables, you'd sit down and play Commander, and then some judge would come up something kindly tell you, "Hey, we're about to do a draft here. Could you guys move along?"
Get out.
Yeah, it happened all the time, right? And it was fine as long as you had found enough people who thought to play deck, and there were dozens of people who did, at least at any event with hundreds, there were at least several dozen. Who would bring a deck, and so I could always go to the Minneapolis Grand Prix, or I could go, to another event and know that if I brought 3-4 decks, I'd probably play all of them before the day was done. In between drafts or other stuff I wanted to do.
And certainly at this point, in the Judge Hotel at the big event, there was always game. There are games going on. On coffee tables and in the bar and in the foyer and on floors and couches and. It was definitely well spread out through the community by then, and it wasn't just judges playing by themselves. It was judges playing with their friends who happened to be non-judges, and we were infused into Gen Con by this point. They had me by then. They had had me as our friends at Pastimes brought me in and had me as a guest. To sling spells in the card room at Gen Con. So we were really in the middle of the cultural lexicon. Because you were talking about books.
Very nice. Speaking of books, what's your from that era, from that time, roughly? Do you have a favorite book?
Well, that's the time that I pretty much stopped reading for pleasure. I started back into college in the fall of 2013.
Right.
So,
as we all know, there's nothing pleasure-like about college.
Right. Well, you read so much. Well, I
especially given what you were studying. I mean, you were studying.
Right. I can't speak for other people who are in other majors.
Right.
But as an English major, and I was finishing my undergrad.
Right.
And then moved on to grad school. There's let me tell you, especially those of you who are about to thinking about going to college and thinking about majoring in English. In grad school, in literature studies in grad school, it's basically read a novel a week and be prepared to write 500 cogent words on it and engage in a thoughtful discussion with 8 or 9 other really, really smart people.
Yeah.
And by the way, don't forget that you're working on at least 2 other projects.
Right. There's a bigger thing going on.
Right. Because you've got your thesis you're developing or your portfolio or whatever. Yeah. So there's a lot of other things going on.
Yeah.
I was reading a lot, but I was reading with a very critical eye at this point. I'm not just kicking back and reading. I think I may have this period when I may have read the Mistborn series. But for the most part, everything I read, the most important books for me from this period were written by Shakespeare scholar Stephen Greenblatt.
Okay.
And I think Judith Butler's Gender Trouble was also a pretty formative book in this period for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. So, all right. So that's the third era. And then I believe we are still in the fourth era, although I think it's coming to, I think COVID's probably brought it to a bit of an end. And I think we're about to start a fifth one. But we've been most recently in this fourth era, what I'd call the era of performing. This is what I would define as the emergence of, for a couple different reasons, performing having a different couple meanings. There's an emergence of this critical mass of content operators online, and they analyze, they play, and they stream, they promote the format. We're starting to see sponsors of Commander content, and then another way in terms of performance is we're seeing some dialects of the format, what I call dialects of the format, emerge. Like I'm thinking specifically of competitive EDH and performance of the deck matters. There's all that going on as well, and there's other ways to think about why this is the era of performing, but you probably have when did you I think you hinted that maybe around 2015 is maybe when we started to hit this.
I'd say the knee in the curve, as far as I'm concerned, was around 2015 when I noticed that magiccards.info, which later became Scryfall, which I know a lot of us use, added Commander color identity to their filtering criteria.
Yeah, big deal.
And that's the point. That's the point when I'm like, okay, we're in the big time now.
Yeah, yeah. Because now you're giving everybody a tool that they can take they can optimize their decks if they want to. They can find weird, crazy cards if they want to. They can, learn about new cards and how they fit the deck and try different ideas. It's just so much. It became so much easier. Scryfall really was one of the biggest developments in Commander history. So,
and one of the
all
things
that crew
is
for doing the work they do.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to say is, again, we didn't realize what this thing was going to become. So it's not like from the get-go we were recording the history of what we were doing. We have had to reassemble a lot of the history to write it down. Okay, this happened on this date. I mean, I've got some pretty good reference points in the timeline because of what Pro Tours I was at or where I was stationed in my Air Force career. So it's easy to have some of those reference points. I will say a big thanks to our friend Cryogen over at MTG Nexus, who has put together a sort of logical history, at least the dates and times of things happening, so that we can go back and reference to them.
Wonderful. And I hope that this episode's also helpful to that effort because there's a lot that you've talked about and provided. Most of the stuff is stuff you've said in pieces and such, but also you reminded me of stuff I've forgotten, but also I think said a few things that I've been like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that person was there at that time and stuff. So yeah, neat.
Well, you never think about, when you're making history, you never think about the fact that you're making history.
Right. You don't exactly have a minstrel. You're not like a knight of old, which has like a minstrel or a scribe following. It's brave Sir Robin, Right. Like it's like, you don't have something like that going on. So I mean, there's obviously with all the names we've mentioned, it almost seems redundant to add more. But I think there are some names out there, names people have heard to be sure. But I mean, I think we just got to recognize them, right?
Yeah, I think the big three names here that I would use are Josh, Jimmy, and Prof. Yeah. So that's Josh Lee Kwai and Jimmy Wong of the Command Zone, and Brian Lewis, the professor from Tolarian Community College. I think they really broke the big ground for everyone else in the content creation game. Right. They weren't necessarily the first, but they were the first to make the big splash. Yeah. Shortly, I think we can point some to Phil DeLuca on Commanderin, which would have more interesting long-term ripples, actually. I mean, Commanderin was a fun podcast that I did a number of times back in the day. Yeah. But eventually, Shivam Bhatt, currently on the CAG, was a later host. Was a later host of that show. And it was on that show, on their show, as a guest host that I discovered future CAG member and 5-tool threat Olivia Gobert.
5-tool threat Olivia. Yes.
5-tool threat.
Outstanding. So I mean, those are just some of the names. And obviously, there's so many more names out there. We try each week to. One of the reasons we did this episode is because we just realized that like you could try to do this for a very long time, and there's just so many community contributors. And I've talked about for how long is this a useful exercise without people feeling either excluded or not. Like we just want to try to put together some of the names that have been in context, right? Not just provide a name a week, but sort of see where that feature goes. But I really appreciate the opportunity, each week to find some way to say thank you to the folks out there like Olivia and Shivam and Josh and Jimmy and the Prof. Yeah, like I said, we don't have to spend too much time on it, but just to take a top moment to say thanks, I think is important.
Yeah. So you haven't brought up any cultural touchstones of this period?
Yeah, well, this one's television. Watchbo. HBO. Watchmen. Enough said.
Yeah, Watchmen's a little more recent than that. I mean,
well, I think we're in the era. It's the era we're in, right? So 2015 to 2020, right? 2019 at least. I'd say to me, the most important. Maybe it's not enough said. The most important if we're going to choose television, the most important season of television was during that time frame, 2015 to 2019, we'll call it, is the first and probably only season of Watchmen on HBO.
Yeah, unfortunately, the only season.
Yeah, they've essentially said that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, see, there was a time,
which is good. I like that, but I hate it. Right?
Yeah, television. I think you're right.
Yeah.
The influence of television because of high speed internet and bigger and brighter TVs and streaming services and whatnot. Television has become what the movies wanted to be before.
Yeah,
and it's the place. People don't make TV shows so that they can go onto a movie career anymore.
Yeah.
They make movies so that they can get a great TV gig.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that television is the most is the medium of the time, and certainly in our COVID times,
right.
It definitely is the medium.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting in this time frame, maybe a little before,
right.
maybe 13 or 14. There was a time when the FX network,
yes, boy, they were good.
Had the three
still good, yeah,
abjectly best shows on TV at the same time.
Yeah,
it was Justified. Mm-hmm. It was The Americans. It was early season, late seasons of Justified, early seasons of Americans,
right,
and the run of Fargo.
Yeah.
All on one network at the same time. That was insane.
Even before then, they had The Shield, which was so good, and HBO had Rome, but FX to me was like Rome came out and other stuff came out on HBO, and you're like, oh, HBO is kind of having a revitalization. They're kind of doing, they'd always done some good stuff. And you're like, oh, okay, The Wire, like Sopranos, you're like, oh, okay, wow, but FX, because FX came from not nowhere, but FX isn't that like part of Fox or something? Like what?
Right.
Like what are they doing suddenly? Doing this amazing stuff. Yeah, that happened earlier than this last performing era of Commander. But it was definitely in the last 10 or so years when who would have thought television was such a big deal when it first came out, obviously, and then it helped transform the political landscape. We're not saying we suddenly discovered television. What we're saying is television should have been replaced like radio mostly has been replaced.
Right.
Like the Victrola has largely been 8-track tapes. The various media, like print journalism has been largely supplanted by other things. And like the fact that television, I guess it's harder to change the impact of something that's in a screen in somebody's home, than we all thought it would be. And the fact that it certainly mutated and changed, but anyway, I know you've got picks beyond Watchmen, but
I mean, in the era, I think that The Good Place has redefined what TV comedy is.
Yeah,
the show, the writing of that show is just so sharp,
good
that after the first season, after the first couple of episodes, you're like, oh my goodness, and then at the end of the first season, like, can they maintain this? And the answer is yes.
And within the first 15 minutes of the second season, you're like, this took a totally different, it was just so well conceived. Just hard to do without spoilers, right? But whatever.
Right. I love the fact that being smart is not a liability for the show.
Yeah.
And of course, I think, especially since we talk about the intersection of our hobby and culture, despite its final two somewhat horrific years, Game of Thrones was the biggest show in TV history.
Yeah, you can't ignore Game of Thrones. It really
it was part of that. It was part of that normalization that we talked about earlier. That Commander became part of mainstream magic culture as nerdcore became part of mainstream culture.
Right.
So we were kind of riding the same wave.
Yeah. And going back to the first era, how much do you think, and it was probably worth discussion more time, how much influence, and stuff certainly predated Lord of the Rings hitting the movie screens, but so much to me traces back to those, it was 2001, 2, and 3, I think, when those movies came out. And for me, that was massive. I mean, that was because of how what I grew up with and how I grew up, the household I grew up with. But it was still like D&D, sort of in the closet kind of stuff, or in the basement kind of stuff, and just the impact that doing those movies and doing them so well had on movies and television and books and the way people talk about stuff. I'd even say that the comic, even though a lot of the early work was already in development, I know, but the fact that the whole Marvel universe was, still, they had some good stuff with some Spider-Man movies and some other stuff, but the way it coalesced, and suddenly there was this audience that was like, it's okay to have a little bit of the nerd come out. And how do you make it cool? And how do you make this nerdy person, somebody that somebody wants to watch, 3 movies successively about, maybe 20? It just really goes back to some of that. Anyway,
right? Lord of the Rings to me is the culmination of a 25-year normalization of nerd culture that started with Star Wars.
Agreed. Yeah.
Right.
That's fair.
It starts then. It was it took some. Obviously, one of the most popular films of all time, and it took some time to work its way in, but the possibilities began there. That we, that TV and movie producers saw where the room was. It took some time for the rest of broader culture to get used to us, right? But
and a few false starts too. Some of the movies that came out were not appealing. But
I think that getting from Star Wars to Lord of the Rings is the birth to maturity point of nerdcore culture. Yeah, which lands us exactly where we are.
Yeah. So a lot of history there, and it feels like we're on this. Like I said, we're on the cusp, I think, of a new era. Probably no name for it yet. Maybe warming or transforming. It's got to rhyme, folks. So if we could all just work together and make it work, that'd be great. But it's probably going to be. I believe it's going to be defined. We could take an episode on this if you want. We could, probably be defined by the current pandemic and also the remote play environment, right? And also, I think the culture Commander community, what the Commander community is going to face at least 2 major challenges. First is that. How do you come back to in-person play? What is the manner of play? What do groups look like? How do people play at kitchen tables? How does that all work? It sounds simple, but it's not going to be. And there's going to be some big stuff happening there. And then how to deal, something we've talked about a little less today, how people are going to be thinking about this. There's been a lot of chatter lately about the too much mainstreaming of Commander. The fact that it's become slick and corporate. Wizards has embraced it, and that's been awesome. And thank you, Wizards, for embracing it. And that comes with a cost, right? Comes, and they would recognize this. I'm sure they'd be the first to say it. We can embrace you. Are you sure that's what you want? Kind of feel, and the more products they print about it, of course, they want to make money, and they should make money. They're responsible for this great game. But it impacts how people build their decks, and it's like, I just took this commander that they pre-made for it, and I just did a thing, and how people try to do things and how we measure that. How do we measure quirkiness in a format? The quirkiness of the format is gone. Some people say, well, I don't know. Is there a quirkometer? How do we know that we've entered this new era? How are we going to define it? So I think all this is going to influence anyway how players come together. How content creators like us talk about it. How the community supports itself. It's gonna be a lot. It's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there's probably a couple of episodes in there. Yeah. Maybe 2. All right, Anthony, there's still plenty of work to be done, but it's time for us to wrap this episode of Commander Community. Agreed. If you're watching this on YouTube, please remember to follow, subscribe, ring those bells. We'd hate for you to miss an episode, and we'd hate for you to potentially miss the answer to Anthony's eternal question.
I did not find out the answer today. I thought by going through the entire history of Commander, we might find the thread that pulled the sweater apart, that revealed the answer. Right. We did not. I'm sorry, folks. I apologize to our viewers.
Why don't you tell them where instead they can find you on social media?
Sure. If you'd like to find me on Twitter, I'm at anthonyaalongi. If you'd like to find me on Facebook, I'm at anthonyaalongi. If you'd like to find me playing online, every once in a while, I'm where Sheldon's about to talk about. Every once in a while.
Okay, I'm on Twitter and Facebook at Sheldon Menery. Please tune into my other show, The Command Chair, every Thursday here on Star City Games and on YouTube. Also on Thursdays, 8 p.m. Eastern in the U.S., and now Sundays, 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the U.S. You can catch me on the Commander RC Twitch channel. That's twitch.tv/Commander RC. Finally, on Sundays, you can find me right here on Star City Games, writing about the best format in Magic's history. As always, I'm Sheldon Menery.
And I'm Anthony Alongi. Thank you once again for sharing your community with us.